Welcome to my latest video blog. I'm Rosenberg, and today I'm going to tell you something very exciting. In fact, when I finally discovered what I'm going to share with you, I nearly fell out of my seat. But let me give you some backstory. I've been talking about codependency for a long time, as many of you know. I'm sure many of you have seen some of my videos and read my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, but I never really liked the term codependency. It always seemed to me an antiquated term, a term that was invented a long time ago to explain something else that quite doesn't explain the problems that my clients who have codependency experience. But before I share my exciting discovery, let me first give you a brief history of the term codependency. In the 1950s, they discovered that when people went to alcohol treatment centers for their alcoholism, if their partners were not involved, there was a higher chance or probability of relapse if they went home. Obviously, as they learned that the alcoholism was more than just the problem in an individual, but also was a problem in the relationship. So they came up with the term the co-alcoholic, or the partner of the alcoholic. And since the 50s, 60s, and 70s, especially in the 80s, there's been an understanding that this is a system issue, a family issue. So as time went on, and especially in the early 80s, they discovered that there was no reason for separate facilities for alcoholism and drug addiction. So they came up with the term chemical dependency. So if you were addicted to alcohol, that was a drug or a chemical, or if you're addicted to cocaine, the same thing. So the term became chemically dependent, and the treatment centers were chemical dependency treatment centers. So if you were a partner of the chemically dependent person, you were the co-chemically dependent. And that was just way too many syllables. So they shortened that to the codependent. You see, the term codependent doesn't really mean what many people think it means. It's not two people that are dependent on each other. So I have been wanting to replace this term forever. I never liked the term because it felt to me as it was degrading, demeaning, and shame-based. So finally, I decided it was time to come up with a new name. Why have a name or a term for disorder that people are embarrassed to even say? Moreover, why have a term that people in the professional field, the psychotherapy field, the social work field, the psychiatric field, they don't respect? Because the truth be told, when I use the term codependency among many of my colleagues, they scoff at it. They scoff at it like I'm using some pop psychology term that really has no clinical or research value. Well, we know they're wrong, and it was time to come up with a new name. So to borrow Melody Beattie's title, or at least copy part of it, I say, instead of codependent no more, I say codependency no more. It's time to introduce the new term self-love deficit disorder. This is a term, this is now a term that actually explains the problem. Self-love deficit disorder, or SLD, has the problem in its name. Think about it. If someone loved themselves, if someone had self-respect, they had levels of self-care, self-love, and self-respect, would they let narcissists or selfish people push them around and take advantage of them? Absolutely not. The key and number one goal in all of my therapy, in all of the treatment that I do with my SLDs, formerly codependents, is to find out what happened to them that made them turn on themselves. And ultimately, it's the trauma that they experienced as a child with their own narcissistic parent. Now, I have plenty of videos that talk about this, but SLD is born in trauma because a child learned to only love themselves or like themselves if they made someone else happy. The problem is no one ever taught them to love them. No one ever taught them about self-love. Every codependent who's not in recovery lacks self-love or it is at very low levels. So when we talk about self-love deficit disorder, we are talking about a person that never learned to set boundaries, to stand up for themselves, to own who they are, where they are, to put a stake in their own personal territory, because they've always been afraid that if they do so and they speak up, they'll be rejected, they'll be abandoned, and they will suffer the fate that all codependents fear most, and that is pathological loneliness. Self-love deficit disorder is the term that gives my clients hope. I've explained the term many, many times to many clients, and on my Facebook page, which has about 4,000 people, in trainings, and everyone loves it. It resonates. It feels right. Because they're not codependent. Codependency, no more. It's about finding the solution to the problem that keeps us from loving ourselves. Because as I've said, and you guys might have heard this before, the antidote to self-love deficit disorder or codependency is self-love. When we believe we deserve respect, when we believe we deserve caring and loving and nurturing relationships, when we feel in our core that that's who we are and that's how we should be treated, then there is a conflict that occurs when someone crosses that boundary and makes you feel bad or hurts you. And that conflict creates anxiety and anger, and you say, WTF. I don't want this. This is unacceptable. I am not going to have someone treat me this way. And you set a boundary, and if it's with a narcissist, they don't like boundaries, and the relationship fails. And it fails early on. See, I don't have to teach my SLDs how to love themselves. I have to figure out the block that got them to learning about it. And once we resolve that block, we get them to slowly but surely build that relationship with themselves that they never had. And that's a relationship of self-love. Because if you can set a boundary and feel good about it, and someone crosses it, you're going to first take care of yourself. And of course, I don't advocate narcissism. The opposite of SLD is not narcissism. And let me be clear about that. The opposite of SLD is mutuality and reciprocity in relationships while maintaining your caring personality type. I don't want people who are naturally caring, naturally patient, naturally altruistic to lose that. That's not the goal of codependency or SLD treatment. It's about finding yourself in relationships in which there's mutuality and reciprocity, and when there's not, there's an automatic, unconscious, self-correcting mechanism. And that happens without you thinking, and that comes in the form of a boundary. And the boundary is that boundary is fueled by courage. And because the person who loves themselves, who respects themselves and takes care of themselves, knows that they are worth setting a boundary and taking a risk that if that person doesn't like them or love them or respect them, then they don't want to be in that relationship. And being alone is better than being abused, neglected, or deprived. And that is the key to SLD therapy, is dealing with the core issue of not loving yourself, being afraid of the consequence of pathological loneliness, and conquering that condition by building your self-esteem, your relationship with yourself, so you can bravely set boundaries and realize that being alone is a hell of a lot better than being with someone who hurts you and demeans you and controls you. Because I learned from my own therapy that being alone is not lonely. And when we can cross that barrier and find ourselves choosing alone and not feeling lonely, then we've succeeded in our recovery. So I say in closing, codependency no more. I'm done with the term. I want to change it. And if it's up to me, in 5 years from now, that term will be replaced with self-love deficit disorder, and we won't be talking about shaming someone when we call them codependent. We will be talking about empowering and affirming someone when we say they have self-love deficit disorder, because the name itself has the goal of the treatment and recovery. So thank you for listening to this video. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if you want more information about me, go to humanmagnetsyndrome.com. Be well.